International Women's Day is about creating a world where women have an equal future, free from stigma, stereotypes and violence. A future that's sustainable, peaceful and with equal rights and opportunities for all. And for 2021, the theme is Choose to Challenge. Hello and welcome, I'm Katie Bates here for AusCycling and we're here to celebrate International Women's Day. I'll be chatting to some superwomen of the sport here in Australia, from world-beating athletes to the local club legends who are really the heartbeat of the cycling community. For the first time, AusCycling has been united under one organisation for all cycling disciplines and for all clubs. It's an organisation that will provide more opportunities for our women than ever for equality and for positive change. Our first guest today is Marnie Fetchner. She's the CEO of AusCycling, who is tasked with catapulting cycling forward to make Australia a nation of bike riders, to be advocates for rider safety, to build stronger club communities, to increase participation, and maybe even develop some Olympic gold medalists along the way. Well, Marnie, thanks so much for joining us. And I think it's pretty symbolic to have International Women's Day. For the first time, we've got AusCycling and you as the CEO, but actually it's the first time we've had a female running national level cycling at all. So a pretty big day for that.
Yeah, it is, Kate. Thanks very much for having me. I'm loving the new gig with AusCycling, and I think it is great to celebrate first steps and firsts for women within sport, and looking forward to having a chat today.
Yeah, I think that the sport in general has changed gears a lot in Australia over the last years, and we're certainly seeing a lot more female leaders step up into the big roles, which is fantastic. But do you think it adds a bit of a different dynamic again to what is already a challenging role, that there's just a small club of you?
Oh, look, I think it is, but I think what we're seeing is a really collegiate approach to addressing this issue of a lack of female leadership at CEO level of national sporting organisations and state sporting organisations. So I think my colleagues have definitely been hugely supportive. I think there's a way to go. We've got a great group of women that are involved, and I think hopefully we're showing and leading the way that it can be done, it is possible, and I think that we can do that collectively as a system.
Well, Manny, you've come from netball, and we've seen some incredible things happen in netball, from big broadcast deals to the sport really stepping forward to be a bit more legitimised, I guess you could say, and very more mainstream in Australia. What do you think the steps are to get cycling there? Because I'd love to see cycling on the TV just as much as we're seeing netball now and our football codes.
Look, it's a really interesting question, Kate, and it starts with really the work that AusCycling and cycling in this country has done in coming together with a major governance reform, and it's about all of the building blocks. So we have great athletes, we have residents in community. I think that what we've seen over COVID is a huge spike in the number of people getting out and riding their bikes. So it's taking all of those elements and building that great base, building audience bases and fans. And I think that there is no question that that can happen in cycling, and I'm looking forward to being part of that journey as we start to build that.
I know that sports like netball have a much broader female participation base, but I saw a great statistic from AusCycling that while 79% of your members are male, so only 21% female, that actually women are far more likely to join with a family membership and thus also bring the kids along to ride. I mean, I feel like that must be a pretty important pillar for you guys in the participation space to really get families involved.
Well, look, I definitely agree, Kate. What we're seeing is what we've traditionally stood for is a lot of racing, and we know that that probably does skew towards a male participation in terms of racing, but we know that cycling is so much more. We know that kids love getting out on their bikes. We know that mums and dads do like spending time with their kids getting outside, and that, as I mentioned before, that's been something that we've definitely seen throughout COVID. And what we're aiming to do is, keep that moving and keep the family out and about, off screens, outside. So it's definitely something that's there, but it's how do we as AusCycling make sure that the offering that we're making to our community is relevant and that women see themselves reflected in our organisation as much as men do.
Yeah, I know that AusCycling has some programs that are specifically aimed at getting women involved, not only actually on bikes and from participation, but also through coaching and leadership. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, look, it's an emerging area, Kate, and something that's really important. I think that we've had a conversation over a number of years that there are not enough female coaches in our environment, and if you can't be what you can't see. So part of our Australian cycling team and our coaches there are doing some work that's actually helping focus on providing opportunities for women to develop their skills in coaching and leadership and building their confidence, because I think once you start to build that confidence and you know that you can do it, and women are notoriously bad at thinking that they can do things, we'll start to see more numbers coming through our coaching ranks and our participation ranks. So we know that women play a really significant role in particularly family and household decisions and what they're comfortable with their kids doing and how they participate. So I think it's a fantastic initiative to get more women involved in cycling coaching. We have launched a new program in the last 12 months called Ride Nation, and that's really about celebrating the fact that we want every child in Australia and every Australian to pick up a bike and feel safe and confident on it. So programs like Ride Nation and our focus on coaching and women in our communities are going to be really foundations for growing that female participation base and encouraging everyone to get out there and on a bike.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how in so many ways COVID kind of signalled people being stuck inside, but for cycling it's seen so many people pick up a bike that maybe never would have done that before. But I've got to ask, have you got yourself a bike yet?
I've got my old triathlon bike, and I've got my I suppose it's a hybrid bike, and my old tri bike has seen better days. So I think I'm in the very long queue of people that are trying to purchase a new bike, and so I can get back out on the road. I've done a lot of spinning, and I think a lot of people have on Swift, and getting back out and onto the bike. So I did the Great Big Bike Ride a couple of years ago with my daughter, and that was absolutely fantastic. So hopefully we can get back out there, and definitely something that I'm planning to put into my fitness regime in more than I have in previous years.
Well, there are some pretty great events out there, some grand fondos, and maybe we'll entice you into the gravel a little bit and get that going. Marnie, listen, to continue to advocate for women's equality, we really do need a woman at every table where the decisions are being made. Do you feel like that's happening, and really women are really starting to become key stakeholders at that level in the decision-making process?
Look, I think the answer is yes, we're starting to see movement. We've had Josephine Suker take up the new chair of the Australian Sports Commission, which is really exciting. I think initiatives that Liz led, Champions of Change, of which there's a sport, male Champions of Change for sport, all of those initiatives are starting to see real movement. Are we at the level that we would want to? No, I don't think we are. But I think we're on a journey. It's recognised. It's part of the conscious decision-making process that diversity, whether that be male, gender, or cultural diversity means that we as a system will make better decisions. And I think the fact that is now at the forefront, and that people are thinking about, have we got women represented, and as much as women putting their hand up and putting themselves forward, it's also about men acknowledging the fact that actually this will be a better environment. We will make better decisions as a system if we have more women involved. So I think that we're on the start of a journey. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that in these types of roles, we get the opportunity to actually keep shaping that and making sure that it's part of the dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I know that governance isn't a particularly sexy term, is it? But making sure that is robust certainly helps the women with more equal opportunities and equality across the board. Marnie, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll have to check in this time next year to see how your first year in the job has been, and seeing how many bikes you've managed to accumulate, because in cycling the perfect number of bikes is N+1. So if you're only on 2, well, you've got a journey to go.
I have. I've been learning lots of new things about cycling, and that was one of the things I learned in my first week. So thanks very much for having me, and I look forward to coming back again next year.
Yeah, thanks, Marnie. Maeve Plouffe is a woman whose efforts have been divided equally between the boards of the Velodrome and the halls of Adelaide University. She's a national champion, a soon-to-be Olympian with record-breaking ways. Well, Maeve, thanks so much for joining us today, and I believe you just finished a big track session. Is that right?
Yep, we've been training pretty intensely in the lead up to the games. So Fridays are usually a track gym day for us. So we just had some 4-kilometre team pursuits with the team, which was a pretty solid session. So finish up and get to talk to you.
Well, I've got to say, I've got a selective memory about those training sessions, Maeve. I've wiped them from my consciousness. Speaking of training and performing, you broke quite a long-standing Australian individual pursuit record the other day. You now hold the honour of being the fastest woman in Australia ever to cover 3,000 metres on the track. That's a bit of a special one. Congratulations.
It is a really special one, and it's one that I've had my eye on since Berlin last year when I did the individual pursuit at a World Champs for the first time, but I didn't think I'd have an opportunity to try and break it, and I wasn't actually going for it on the weekend when I did break it. It was really unexpected. I had all right legs, but we are in the middle of a pretty heavy training block, and we had no taper for it or anything like that, but my coach Glenn, he said, you know, if you want to do the IP for some odd reason, you can go have a shot at it. So I thought, why not test the legs, have a go. Went out, tried my best, and yeah, it was a great time. So it was super exciting. And yeah.
It's interesting that you say the coach said for some reason, because an individual pursuit has got to be 3.5 of the worst minutes of your life. Every single one of them. It's a pretty tough event. And mentally, you know, I think there's a lot of challenges. But speaking of pretty tough challenges mentally, what was 2020 like? Because you had the high of being named in an Olympic team and as one of the youngest ever female cyclists to ever be so. But then the games didn't actually happen. How has that left you feeling?
It was really bittersweet. It almost feels like it was that sort of achievement of the games is being ripped away from you at the time, which was difficult, I'm not going to lie, especially when you have all of that planning, the years of planning and training all kind of lined up and ready to go and ready to be executed. However, once I did find out the games were postponed and not cancelled, it was a huge sigh of relief for me because I had a really hectic lead up leading into the games. We have such a packed, full of talent women's team pursuit squad, and the girls who were all up for selection, there were 9 of us, and they were all so talented that the selection process was actually really hard and it was really, really taxing. So having the games an entire year later meant that I actually had time to settle in my new team, get to know them well, figure out my role within the team, establish myself, and actually train with them, which has been really invaluable for me because, joining a new squad and racing with at the Olympic Games within 6 months of joining that squad is that's actually pretty crazy. So I am actually grateful that the games have been postponed. It's been a massive benefit for us.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective, but I want to pick up on one word you used to describe it, which was hectic. And Maeve, I feel like hectic is kind of your thing because on top of heading to the Olympics for the Australian track team, you're also at university doing a double degree in law and science, majoring in marine biology and ecology. It's a massive mouthful, but how on earth do you balance all of that?
Yeah, so I've been studying since I came out of school. I knew that I wanted to get into science. It's something that I've always wanted to do and I'm very interested in, but I couldn't give up the humanities subjects entirely, so I decided I would give law a shot and see if I liked it, and I actually really did. It was quite a challenge, and I'm really interested especially in environmental law and sort of policy and making, I guess, a bit of a difference. So that's definitely a good motivation for when I'm finished up with cycling. Balancing is a funny word because a lot of people are like, wow, you must be so organized and so balanced with your studies and your sport. I would say that I kind of go in waves where I study really hard and I'm training too hard as well, and then I burn myself out and then repeat. But it's been really good coming into the track team because I've just sort of, relaxed a little bit this year with my study load. So before the games, I'll back it right off. But I've just got to pick and choose my times when I am studying versus when I'm training. For example, last year when the games got postponed, I was straight on the phone begging my university to let me into as many courses as possible. So I actually was a full-time, technically 4 subjects, full-time student last year. But then this year I'll back it right off. So it's balancing, but it's also just prioritizing what you want to achieve in that year.
Oh, I love it. You're such a good role model for the small humans and the people coming through the sport, Maeve, because I think traditionally people look at athletes and think you have to choose between being an athlete or following any academic and other career ambitions. So I absolutely applaud you for that. It's an interesting thing that you've chosen to ride with a team on the road, ARA Pro Racing Sunshine Coast. They have a pretty equal men's and women's focus, but they're also associated with a university. They must really encourage you to keep that, and we use the word balance, but that balance between your racing and your studying.
Since ARA Pro Racing Sunshine Coast are a development team, it's actually one of their core focuses, which I think really aligns well with my own values. And I can just see how well-rounded the other team members on my team are because of that focus. So pretty much everyone on the team is encouraged to study, and a lot of teams say that they encourage their athletes to study, but I can well and truly say that they do. And everyone has to have that off-bike balance, something else that they're passionate about. And that's so important because otherwise, as an athlete, we tend to value ourselves on how fast we can ride a bike, which is so crazy, but we're all guilty of it. So having something on the side can really complement what you're doing on the bike. It's definitely not a hindrance. It's not effort taken away. There's definitely a misconception that if you're passionate about your studies or passionate about something else, then you have to be less passionate about cycling. I think that it's great that the team supports that and also supports the men's and women's teams equally.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy, actually, and it certainly helped me get through my career, the whole study, again, balance, a lot of inverted commas we're using here. Maeve, I want to ask you, there's been a lot in the news lately around women's cycling, men's cycling, equality across prize money, and things like that. I mean, from your view, how do you think cycling is going in terms of men and women's equality?
I think it's improving, and as a young athlete coming in, I have to be grateful for the women, like pioneers of the sport that have come before me and really driven that equality, because I think it really has been a fight. It's definitely not something that I take for granted or that's just magically happened over the years. A lot of women have put in so much effort into making it equal. I think that some races are, for example, the Festival of Cycling this year, replacing the Tour Down Under, was as close to an equal race as I have ever really seen. It was great. But then I see the prize money results of other big races, especially in Europe, and I am pretty disappointed in that. I think our track program is brilliant for promoting equality. There's pretty much no difference to how the men's and women's track endurance teams are treated at the moment. So that's a great start. But definitely on the road, I think with commercial sponsors and the likes, it can be really sort of, the differences can be exasperated, I guess.
Yeah, well, our theme for International Women's Day in 2021 is choose to challenge. And I think that you're perfectly placed to challenge and keep pushing for the equality that women are seeking. Maeve, thank you so much for joining us today, and massive good luck for Tokyo. We'll all be watching. You've got another year under your belt, and we wish you every success.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Maeve. Clubland is the beating heart of cycling in Australia, where community and participation support AusCycling's vision of making Australia a nation of bike riders. Jess Mcclellan, the Vice President of Hawthorn Cycling Club, is one of the local legends nurturing the grassroots with a special focus on the women's scene. Well, Jess, thanks for joining us and happy International Women's Day.
Thanks a lot, you too.
Look, there's some pretty big things happening at Hawthorn Cycling Club, a lot under your guidance. What made you step up into a leadership role there?
I'm surely not going to take all of the credit, but yeah, I stepped up to Vice President after 2 years as membership officer. So I came up into that role mainly because there was a vacancy and a lot of people said I'd be good at it, and just wanted to get a bit more involved in the decision making at the club level as well.
Well, and you actually have a dedicated women's officer on the club committee. What kind of prompted you to do that?
Well, I guess that's sort of, if we track back to about 2010, 2011, well before I got involved in the club. And so Liz Hall, she was the driving force behind that. Around that time, Hawthorn only had about 5 or 6 female members, but from what I've gathered and talking to other members who were around then, Liz just made it feel like you're part of something and that it was a lot bigger than what it at the time. And that momentum sort of grew, and she had the support of Laurie Lovelock, who was the president for a lot of those years. And I guess he just said, well, what do you need? And we'll support you in doing what you want to do. And I guess that approach has grown throughout the years, and just having that space to decide what we want to do as a women's subcommittee and as a group, and just presenting those opportunities to members.
I mean, from participation to racing, it really seems like Hawthorn's done a pretty good job of kind of inspiring more women in particular to pick up bikes and get on them. Like, in one way, you could look at it in a kind of if you build it, they will come field of dreams kind of approach. Or do you think there's a bit more of a secret sauce kind of recipe to getting women through the door and on bikes?
I think getting through the door is at the Hawthorn, we have quite a strong recreational program as well. So there's that. A lot of people come in and say, "Oh, I don't want to race. That's not my thing." And for some people, that still might be the case, but they find other ways to get involved. So on our recreational weekends, social rides. We have our women's camp as well, but there's also those racing pathways are encouraged as well through our criteriums and through winter road racing as well.
Yeah, I've heard about these famed women's camps. They sound like a little bit of fun. You also are thinking kind of outside of the box, and I know that you have a pretty strong presence in eSport on Zwift because one of your members, Ange McRae, every single time I go in there it says Ange McRae is Zwifting, and I've seen her pop up in a lot of the races. How important do you find that community stuff and just kind of getting out there and giving it a go?
It's definitely important, and I guess throughout, so Ange doesn't ride outside anymore. She used to do a lot of combine racing and road racing, but she's just completely taken to Zwift. And then during the recent lockdowns that we had in Melbourne as well for quite an extended period of time, she was there on Zwift, just started running a weekly social ride, and then that snowballed into more Hawthorn members getting out there and or getting indoors on Zwift and joining in racing and TTTs on there. And that sort of helped create a community as well. And there was a lot of other members that put in a lot of work over that period, and that almost provided a springboard for when we returned to riding outside from October and November as well. So it's got to that point where there's that real groundswell, and there's a lot of people there. So if you want to talk in Zwift racing, there's Ange to go to. If there's a handicap you want to race, then Alison Skeen's your person. So we've got that there's a real group and a lot of knowledge being shared around our women members now at Hawthorn.
Yeah, isn't it incredible just the sense of community that has been forged through things like lockdowns, and even members with health challenges that may not be able to partake in traditional club activities that are still being involved. Something that we do know is that people, if you can see it, you can be it, essentially, is the thing that we always say about the women. Do you think, including the participation space, but also you stepping up into a leadership role, do you think that kind of role modelling is encouraging other women within the club to also step up into those positions?
Yeah, I think we've had some really super strong women's officers throughout the period. So Beck Covington, she's someone else that I'd like to mention. So she was someone that through the She Race program that she started with from members from other clubs, that was something that really got me into racing about 3 years ago. So that's mainly a Facebook community that's developed where we have just information sharing about what races are going on, what's happening at all the clubs, and just saying, I'll be here at this race if you want to have a chat beforehand, just to really encourage people to turn up and have a go. So, and yeah, seeing those women visible on the committees in different roles, not just as women's officers, I think is really valuable for every club as well.
Oh, unreal, Jess. I just love what you guys are doing at Hawthorn. Thanks so much for joining us, and keep fighting the good fight at Clubland. And I think that we're building a future generation, an army of young ladies stepping up within the cycling world. So thanks again.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Kate.
The Olympic Fast Track program is a key initiative crucial to AusCycling team's Olympic gold medal strategy, and our next guest, Lynn Munroe, is leading the way for our athletes to reach their Olympic dreams. Well, hi Lynn, and thanks so much for joining us today. We're here for International Women's Day, and the theme this year is Choose to Challenge, and I think that the work that you're doing over at AusCycling in the high performance program is exactly that. So can you tell us a little bit about the program and the work you're doing with our track cycling athletes?
Yeah, so I head up a program called the Olympic Fast Track program. We initiated it in response to kind of low numbers in our female track sprint pathway. Steph Morton was one of 2 Olympians going to the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and decided to retire, not heading to 2021. So we're now left with Carly McCullough, who's our remaining athlete at that level. And we have one other athlete in the national program in our academy squad. And that's it in the national program. And then lower down the pathway, dwindling numbers still. So it was a really kind of proactive response to that, and saying, right, well, we obviously through Australia, we're very high performing in sprint, and we challenge for gold when we go to Olympics. So 2024 was looking like a hard challenge for us, and we needed to initiate something very different. So I head up a program where we're looking for exceptional athletes from essentially other sports, other training backgrounds, people that we know have that capability within 3 years of an Olympic, seeking them out, and then really trying to use innovative practices to get them on the line vying for gold in 2024. So it's a really unique challenge, and as you said, I think the interesting thing for me is we've got to try and really maximise the opportunity in working with women. We've got to design an environment and use very purposeful training that gets them there quickly. And so that's very much understanding who we are as women uniquely, the coaching practices, the training practices, and the dynamics of the environment. So there's a big learning piece in this for us. We recognise that, we're still on the back foot for women in sport, really. And so for me, having the opportunity to head this program and say, right, we've got to do something real special to get there. And it has to start with getting the environment and getting the coaching right. So it's a really unique opportunity. And I think the sort of second part of the opportunity is to leave a legacy. We want to obviously make sure that we've got a flourishing pathway for the future, and also that we understand what we're doing with women and really making something that's special for stepping forward in the women's arena. So yeah, exciting project.
Well, one of the words I keep picking up is unique. I mean, is there a uniqueness in coaching females versus males? Because it's quite a female targeted and specific program that you're running.
Yeah, look, I think that's the opportunity to understand. If we look at the sort of research and the practices that have got us to where we are in high performance sport right now, it's largely driven by men. We're only just coming into the arena effectively as women. And so we look at all the kind of evidence-based practices we talk about, they're largely designed on men. So I think we've got to understand that. And I think it's too early to kind of go, oh, yeah, well, we're definitely different here and there. I think what we can say is that we've got to enhance that sense of there being diversity and it being something that we want to harness those advantages of being different. So there's a bit of exploring involved, and that's something that we're picking up the mantle for in this program and really hoping to lead the way to understand what those differences are and use them to our advantage. I think most coaches would say that when they work with women, they recognize there are some dynamics that are different. There's some focus and some ways that we interact very differently. There's language potentially that we use, the way we interact with our peers and the relationships that we build are different. So if we're not understanding that, and if we're not actually looking into how does that impact the environment that we need to create for them, then we're missing a trick. And we're not also looking after those athletes and supporting them flourishing and being all who they are. So that's the opportunity that we have here, is to learn that. And we've made some good inroads into understanding that. And from there, again, that's part of that legacy piece, is once we have some of that information, is we start then using that and educating some of the coaching staff that are out there in the pathway and trying to drop that down into the environments lower down and really make a difference in this space for women.
Well, it's pretty good news for the athlete development, especially the young ladies wanting to, emulate Anna Meares or Carly McCulloch and win their Olympic gold medal. But what about from the coaching side? Because you're a minority insofar as, Lynn, you are actually the only female coach within the AusCycling system in high performance, which is remarkable. And even on a global level, you're a bit of an anomaly, the job that you're doing. How did you set out on this path to reach where you are with the coaching?
Yeah, look, I never at any point until I kind of got to here in this high performance arena recognized that, there's a difference in me being female. I was somebody who strived hard, worked hard, had aspirations, and I actually started in the sports pathway as a strength and conditioning coach. Then I progressed on to working for Cycling New Zealand. I did my Masters in Sports Science with the sprint program when I was there. I moved over to Britain, was working with the Scottish cycling team prior to the 2014 Commonwealth Games, and then came over back to Australia. Did my PhD, and I think that was a big part for me in terms of saying, I've really got to find the best of who I am to get into this kind of pointy end of things. And when I came over to then work with the Australian cycling team on the back end of that PhD, I think that's when I started looking around and going, oh, hang on, there's only me here. And that was interesting. It's definitely, I think we all recognize as women, I think that sense of isolation, loneliness, of the dynamics in the room are very different when you're on your own going, I'm the representation of difference here. And just not having that person at your shoulder to stand up and say, hang on, it's not just a different perspective that's about Lynn, it's actually a different perspective that's about being a woman, and there's something in how we're experiencing things here. And so that's been challenging. And as you say, I think stepping onto, doing World Cups last year was my first eye-opener of, again, looking around and going, oh, well, I'm the only female on the line here. So I didn't recognize it in myself until you start looking around, seeing it's only you, and seeing how those dynamics are challenging, and they are. I was on a course with the AIS this year for female high performance coaches, and they introduced me to a term called second generational gender bias, and suddenly I started hearing back to myself all the dynamics I was experiencing. And the second generational aspect is basically saying, first generational is this explicit stuff, it's the real stuff that nobody would tolerate. But the second generational stuff is saying, it's like, all the guys here absolutely support and respect me, but there's things in those dynamics that are maybe not quite working for me. There's a perspective that I'm bringing to the table that's maybe not being heard, or it's producing that sense of it's a little bit challenging, like she's seeing things a different way, or working with the athletes maybe in a slightly different way. And so that's the bit, again, where you look over your shoulder and say, well, hang on, this is actually hard. And there's that additional weight when you go into what's already a very tough arena in high performance sport. You've got this weight of actually having to go well, I've got to carry myself extra here. I've got to have a voice. I've got to push for change. I've got to be the flag waver. And that was never something in my life that I thought I was going to have to be. But you then have to pick up that mantle. And now I think, having gained that confidence of having worked in this environment for a few years, I've now started to recognize the value in my uniqueness. And really harness that and be able to kind of push for change. As you said, the topic of this meeting and interview today, like challenging for change, is like there's something there where I have to be that role model. I want to be that role model. And I carry it forward now with pride, where maybe a few years ago I didn't quite have that confidence. And so it's taken a while for me to get to the point where I have that courage to speak and say, hey, we've got to do things a little bit differently here. We've got to open our eyes and try and move things forward for women.
Oh, it's so, the way you put it is just so perfect, Lynn, and I think that AusCycling is really lucky to have you in the system, and also the path that you're forging is the one that the generations to come will get to easily walk. So thank you for the work that you're doing in that space. I have to ask, do you have any advice for the budding coaches of the future who are umming and ahhing about what it may involve and what their place may be for any of the young ladies?
Yeah, look, I've actually, one of the roles that I take on is trying to mentor, so that I have some specific women and girls that I'm working with in the pathway now as performance support staff as well as coaches. And I also do a lot of talking to things like unis where there's, they have employment evenings and things like that, because I think there are some big messages there. It's not easy being isolated at points or being in a minority at points, but I think if you're armed with that understanding, it doesn't catch you by surprise. So for me, there was a sense of like, just looking around the room and going, oh, okay, hang on, am I experiencing this? And having that self-doubt. So I think that when you can put that out to people and say, look, you are going to experience some challenges, but you're then aware of that, and then it's about having a really good team around you. I really had a fantastic session listening to Judy Murray, who was talking, Andy Murray's coach and mum, who was talking on the AAS conference last week, who was talking about building army. And I thought that's what's wonderful. And it sounds strong and it sounds intimidating, but what she's saying is have people at your shoulder, people that you can turn to, who are you, they're going to see you, they're going to support you. So I think that's a big one, having somebody who's a mentor, who is an outlet for you and who can talk things through with you. And those two things then give you that arm and a leg of support, and you're going to need it at some points. But it also then lets you have inroads into tapping into other people that have walked before you. And coming back to my journey, that's something I think that I've struggled with. There's something nice in the pride of being the pioneer, but it also means you're the one walking through the jungle with the bushes and plants hitting you in the face. And so I think if I can clear the path a little bit, great. I'm really proud to have done that. And then giving those advices like, now, bring people with you. Join the dots between all of the women that are out there, bring people with you, and it gives you that kind of strength in numbers. So I think that's a big one. And I think the other one for me is have the courage to speak up. We are actually in a very supporting environment, and the men in this environment are, as I said before, they really respect and value me, but they're not aware. They're not aware of what I'm experiencing. Why should they be? So there's something there in terms of actually being able to openly say, do you know what would really help here? Or do you know what I'm experiencing? That's a really big one, is just having the confidence to say, look, I am actually experiencing some hard stuff because... And actually then bringing that to the table. And I think that if you do that early, that you start to kind of empower yourself rather than sitting on the back foot and wondering. For me, it tapped a lot into confidence, and you're sort of going, oh, I don't know, am I experiencing this? Is it me? Is it the room? And so I think if I could leave a message with people, is don't let anything impact that confidence, because you're going to need it. And there's no reason to have it impacted either if you have that support and if you have those conversations.
Well, that's pretty cracking advice, Lynn. And based on the jungle analogy, I'm now picturing you in a safari suit. So we might have to get you an AusCycling safari suit for the job. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us. And we will look on with eagerness at the progression of not only your glass ceiling breaking career, but also those of your athletes. So happy International Women's Day.
Fantastic. And look, it's wonderful to have this opportunity. And I think the more that we provide those opportunities, the more that we can empower and role model. And it's fantastic. So thank you very much for this.
Thanks, Lynn. The Tokyo Olympics will see the introduction of Bmx Freestyle, a spectacular discipline which sees the riders perform tricks and sequences in a BMX park, and at the front of the charge for the Olympic glory for Australia is Natalia Deem. Well, Natalia, thanks so much for joining us today. You're a BMX freestyler. I think most Aussies know what BMX is in huge part to Nicole Kidman and her BMX Bandit days, but BMX freestyle is a whole different beast. You're going to have to tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's so new, and a lot of people, don't understand what it is, and everyone assumes that when I say, freestyle BMX, they just think it's race still, when no matter how many times I explain it, but it's, doing tricks off the ramps, backflips and all sorts, and got into it at a young age. So all my friends did it, and it's just so much fun, and I've stuck at it forever.
Well, it sounds inherently pretty dangerous, and I'm noticing that you're sporting a cast on your hand. Is that a training injury?
Yes. So nearly 3 weeks ago, we were doing a contest rehearsal, learning, how to deal under pressure, and, doing our 1 minute runs and stuff. And I've dropped in, I've done my first trick, and I landed it, but my wheel slid out from underneath me, and it happened so fast. There was a ramp right after where I landed, and it was like I hit a wall. So I'm lucky just to come out with a broken hand.
Well, I did want to ask that. I mean, how do you even learn these tricks? Do you just kind of go out there and give it a crack and see what happens? Or is there a whole planning process before you do that?
Growing up and not having a foam pit and stuff, and, just having to learn straight to the concrete, the basic stuff, is somewhat safe to do. As you progress, and, now it's a professional sport, there's like a bit of a process where you try it into the foam pit and you perfect it, and repetition, and then you take it to something that's called a resi box, and it's a normal jump, but it has like a mattress landing on top, so if you did fall or make a mistake, you don't get too hurt.
It sounds like very much like a don't try this at home kind of thing. I think BMX, this kind of BMX is usually historically associated with kind of the X Games. But now in Tokyo, it's actually an Olympic sport. That must be a pretty big opportunity. When you started the sport, is the Olympics where you thought you'd end up?
No, not at all. Like, the dream was also, like, always to ride professionally and just, make a living off it. No one ever thought it was going to be an Olympic sport, or we were going to be taken so seriously. So, I can speak for everyone in the sport. Like, we are so excited, and we can't wait to see where we'll go now with being an Olympic sport and how many people are going to join.
Well, you are the only Aussie female on track to represent Australia. Is it a bit lonely as a club of one amongst the fellas?
Yeah, it does. It does get a bit lonely sometimes, but the boys are super supportive, and they motivate me to try new things. And if I ever need help, they're there to help me. Definitely does get intimidating, but hopefully once the Olympics shows on TV and everyone can see it's a real sport and it's not just the skate park hangout, hopefully more girls and young girls get into it, and hopefully I'm along on the ride to teach them and show them how it's done.
Well, skate park hangouts kind of sound fun as well. I've got to say.
Yeah, I guess.
Before these competitions, do you sit down and plan out the sequence of your performance? Is it a routine, or do you just go out there and go by feel and see what happens?
So it's a bit of both. If you're outside of competition and you're just riding a skate park, you just go by feel and, whatever you want to do. Usually with contests, you only have 1 minute to showcase your best skills. So usually you'll plan out what you do and, what to do after the next trick. But let's say you make a mistake or you lose some speed, then you have to quickly adapt to know what trick you can do every time if you did run out of speed. So sometimes it can change very quickly, but if it all goes to plan, then that's what you planned, I guess.
Are the women doing similar tricks to the men? I mean, do you watch, like Brendan Lupos, he's been Australia's best freestyle BMXer and he's world champion, in fact. Do you watch the tricks he does and think, oh, okay, maybe I can get to that? Or is there kind of create your own style and create your own trick kind of scenario?
It's definitely create your own style, and there's, you get judged at a contest for points. Everyone has their own style, but definitely I watch the men, and we all watch each other, and you get ideas off them, and you might think, oh, I actually could try that. It doesn't look too hard, once you progress further down the line. We don't do all the tricks that men do. Doesn't mean that we can't. I think there's just a lot of fear factor for women that we have to overcome. But there is girls that can, do well and do some of the tricks that the men do.
Well, that's an interesting one that I'd love to hear how you face those fears. I mean, because from the outset, it looks like, where do you even start? And it's pretty intimidating. Do you break it down bit by bit when you are trying to learn those big new tricks?
Yeah, definitely. Like, if the men, they're doing triple tail whips, the women some women are only just learning one tail whip now. So you'll learn that, and you'll learn it over the box, and, you think, okay, I'm going to try 2 now. So, I'm going to go higher on this single whip to make sure that I have enough time to do a second one. So there is a mental game. For me, it's, of course you need skill and talent, but it's, 60% mentally, like a mental game. So if you overcome your fear, you can do anything that you want to do.
Well, I will take those words to my 6-year-old daughter, Natalia, and I might also say that I think she'd be more capable of a single tail whip right now than I would. But hey, give anything a go. Thank you so much for joining us today. The theme this year for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge, and I think we've all learnt a whole lot more about freestyle BMX than we knew at the beginning of the day. So look, we look forward to watching your journey into the Olympics, and also inspiring the next gen of girls to get out there and give it a go. So thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Kimberly Conte is one of only a handful of female race directors, not only in Australia, but globally in cycling. Kimberly runs a tight ship at the Tour Down Under. It's a women's stage race with an international reputation for excellence. Well, Kimberly, it's so great to see you, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Kate. Happy International Women's Day to you too. It's a pretty exciting day.
Yeah, it really is. Our theme this year is Choose to Challenge, and I think what you're doing in the event directing space is certainly a big role for the women and leading the way there. The Tour Down Under in 2021, as usual, a great success, but a little bit different to normal. Is it a different process to run a national-based event versus an international one?
It is, and it gave us a lot of opportunities. We didn't have the same look, we didn't have the same race. We knew that going into that, but it gave us an opportunity to really put it out there for our domestic riders, to be able to focus on that, plus have our Australians coming in from overseas. It was quite an exciting challenge, and one that we were happy to take on.
It's fair to say that when you think about a race director, you kind of think without them, the race just doesn't happen at all. But what are the nuts and bolts of what goes into your daily job? It changes a lot. I would say right now, the big thing I'm working on now is routes for the following year. So that's probably the biggest component of my role, at least at the beginning. And so I do a lot of consulting from a technical perspective, because I'm also an official. So that plays into it, but it's really designing routes that are going to really showcase what I think I'd like to see for the women riders. So whether I want things to be quite technical or quite impactful, I love short, punchy courses. People know that about how I design things, and that's probably the bulk of it. And then also playing into the fact that, we're a tourism organization as well, and we get the chance to focus on some of the most beautiful areas here in South Australia. And that's always one of the best parts of my job. There's nothing better than setting a route, which I did a few days ago, and then heading out on the bike and testing it out from my perspective. So at the beginning, it's really that kind of design and that creativity that comes into play. And then looking at the race again, do I like the flow of a stage? Do I want to move the climb from one part of the race to another? That really is the beginning of it. And then we go into all the type of technical meetings, meetings with our other stakeholders, police department, which was so important this year, the work that we did with SA Health to make sure that this event could be run. I always say we
need events that are safe and successful. And that goes without saying any year, but this year particularly, there was a lot of obviously extra focus due to COVID. So that's probably the nuts and bolts of it at the beginning, and then it becomes more frenetic and technical as I start contracting teams and working out who's going to be coming, which riders are going to come, will that feature in the courses I've designed, and then just getting everyone on board. I think the main thing is just being a leader, because there's so many things that happen as a race director that fall under your remit. And then as you become closer to the event, that it gets even bigger and stronger. And that envelope of what you're taking care of during the day, knowing that you're responsible for that entire package as it moves down the road on race day, can be pretty daunting.
Well, you make it sound quite romantic, actually. We'll throw a beach into this course, a beach view and a winery in over there. But as you say, it can be pretty intimidating. But it must be pretty satisfying when it all comes together. What even drew you toward being a race director?
I got involved in cycling, in men's cycling, actually, when I was still living in the United States. I was still competing a bit as a triathlete. Because that was kind of winding down. I knew I still wanted to be involved. I was coaching, and I had a small women's cycling group that I was coaching, and really loved that part of the event, and got involved as a volunteer with a group in the United States called Medalist Sports. And thankfully, after that, I've been with them ever since, and started organizing events and different capabilities in different areas. And for me, just kind of working my way through events, just was something that I really wanted to focus on. I knew that for women's sport, we could do better. Often I was seeing women's racing in what I would call in a box. You know, women would come out and they do a criterium, or they do a square around in a stage, and the men would go off and race and come back. And that was the romantic race, if you want to talk about things being romantic. I knew we could do better. I knew that if women were exposed to more technical courses, first of all, we know they can race that. That's never been the issue. But fans would start to see that. People would start to see what they were capable of and how exciting women's sport is.
Yeah, I mean, I look forward to the day, Kimberly, when it's just cycling, not women's cycling, and not the women's Tour Down Under, but just the Tour Down Under. And I guess we'll get there. In the race directing space, and in fact in leadership in women's sport, you might be horrified to know that only 13% of our leaders in sport in Australia are actually women. Do you ever really notice that? Do you ever feel like you're kind of the odd one out in a real boys' club?
Yeah, I did at first. I think I was a little bit nervous about that. I mean, I think I go back to being a triathlete again, to that background where I just competed with men. You competed in opens, and so for me, it wasn't as obvious there. When I moved across into cycling, I did notice, particularly in that leadership role, that oftentimes I was the only woman in the group. And I was probably maybe a little hesitant at first about that, but in reality, I thought, well, what does it matter? I know I can do this job, as could lots of women, and so it shouldn't really matter, and it doesn't really matter. I did at first encounter a little bit of a few situations, a few stories where I'd be standing there on the day of stage one, and my husband would be coming up to see if I needed anything. Someone would ask a technical question, and they'd ask it of him instead of me. And he would just start, he'd say, I have no idea, wouldn't know the answer at all. You need to speak to the race director. She's standing right next to me. But he'd also get quite upset at it, as I would. I think at first people just didn't quite take that seriously, or they just weren't quite sure, I guess, how to approach me for some reason. So, but I've always seen it as, it shouldn't really matter what anything I am, as I just thought I could do the job, and I was determined to do a good job and to prove that it didn't matter if I were a female, and it shouldn't really matter. You're qualified to do the job. You're going to put on a good race.
Yeah, I feel like you might have some more stories there, Kimberly, that could come out over a glass of wine in one of these beautiful wineries that we go past in the course that you've designed. Why do you think that there aren't more lady leaders in sport? Do you think it's an intimidating space to step into, or, do you think that the change is really happening?
I think today the change is really happening. It's good to see that. I know when I came into officiating, I was really there were women that had already stepped into those roles before me, and there are women within the AusCycling officiating roles that work not only on a national level but an international level. So I knew that that was attainable and achievable, and I could see those strong role models out there. And I've always been really grateful to those who paved that way before I got there. I never honestly thought too much about being a female and being a race director until someone asked me the question, how many of you are there around the world? Whilst I hear that there's only 13%, I'm sure that that will continue to grow. We have a really strong pool of athletes and of people that surround the sport. And if I go to my office now, the Tour Down Under team are mostly female. So there's a lot of leaders within that team, whether it's marketing, whether it's in admin, whether it's in race direction. There's a lot of us in there now, and I definitely think the change has taken place in that respect.
Well, you guys are just doing an awesome job over there and achieving some really incredible things, not just for the women, but for the sport of cycling in general. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just have to make one request for next year's Tour Down Under. Can you send the women up the corkscrew? I'd really love to see that.
You know what? I was there the other day. Actually, I have a few. I've got a couple up my sleeve that I'm really waiting. And so when we make that World Tour announcement, which will come at some point, I have a couple of really spectacular climbs. As much as we all love Wollonga, it's not the only climb here in South Australia. And we don't do the Alpe d'Huez every year at the Tour de France. So I'd really like to see some different climbs, particularly for the women, because I know they'd really excel.
Yeah, well, some pretty exciting things yet to explore at the Tour Down Under. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we could chat to you all day. Alas, our time is up. So happy International Women's Day, and we'll see you for the Tour Down Under next year.
Thank you so much for your time, Kate. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kimberly. When it comes to stories of persistence and passion, well, there's not many that rival our next guest, Beck Mcconnell. From illness to team breakdowns, it hasn't been an easy journey to the top of the mountain bike ranks, but she's arrived and she means business. Well, Beck, it's great to have you here. You're about to head to Tassie, I believe, for the National Championships next weekend.
Yeah, that's right. It's coming up quickly, and you know the summer's kind of been and gone, but yeah, really looking forward to heading to Tassie on Monday.
Yeah, I mean 2020 was a bit rubbish for everybody in terms of racing and getting out and about. Is it a bit more nerve-wracking and exciting to get back into the racing after what has been a bit of a strange period for the entire sport?
Yeah, February's actually been quite full of racing for me and for mountain bikers in Oz, which has been really good to get that underway. We haven't raced in Oz since Nationals in March last year, so yeah, that's been really cool. And yeah, it's been super quiet on the racing front everywhere for the last 12 months. So yeah, it's really, really cool that things are starting to get a bit more normal again.
Yeah, I bet you can't wait to get racing internationally as well. If I look back on the last couple of years of your career, there have been some longer periods without racing, with illness and team dramas. Back in 2018, you actually got Epstein-Barr. It seems like that was a pretty big thing to overcome. I mean, how did you get through that?
Yeah, I think a lot of athletes kind of go through that, you know, just not getting the balance of training and travel and racing and everything perfect or right, and you know it can come down pretty hard on you. So yeah, I guess I got through it with like really good support. You know, my husband Dan and my family, and I just signed with for the first time with my team who I'm with now still. And yeah, it was like a super new environment, but they fully supported me through it. So that was like pretty special, and just to have, I think, belief, other people's belief in you when you don't fully believe in yourself is like pretty amazing, and helped me get through that.
Yeah, well, you mentioned your husband Dan and how important that belief that people have in you can really lift you up and get you through those tough times. You guys are kind of like the golden couple of Australian cycling. And I mean, it must be pretty cool to go on this whole adventure with him.
Yeah, it's been an adventure. We've started traveling together like since 2010, I think. So, you know, as you can imagine, our lives have changed a lot in that time. And, you know, we started out just traveling and doing a bit of bike racing, and, you know, you think you're doing it all pretty good, and then, you know, you're just learning so much over all these years. And, you know, like, the goals are still the same and the love is still there. But yeah, like, we're so lucky to be able to do it together. Yeah, I feel like there might be a few chapters in that book, Beck. So we'll have to get you to write that one upon retirement. It's interesting because mountain bike, and you will see this up close because Dan is in the men's scene, but it seems from the outside like the women and the men have a fairly equal scene in terms of opportunity to race and also prize money. Would that be fair? The entire time I've been racing, I've never been really exposed to a lot of this inequality. You know, prize money is the same. There's only been very few exceptions where I've experienced an event where the prize money wasn't the same. And our racing opportunities, we race at the World Cup on the same day. We get the same amount of TV coverage. So all of that is quite amazing. And yeah, we're really fortunate. I think the only thing, you know, salaries are not exactly on par. But, you know, as far as equality in sports, and especially cycling, I think we're really lucky. Yeah, I mean, I've certainly loved seeing some of the personalities that have come through the mountain bike world, and even being able to access a lot of the content through Red Bull TV has been really cool. And for me, I've been able to show my 3- and 6-year-old daughter, you know, what mountain biking is and kind of how hardcore the chicks are as well. So I think that's really important as well. Beck, I guess after Nationals, your focus will turn a bit toward Tokyo. There must be a little bit will it, won't it happen feeling about that. But also the World Cup season kicks off again pretty soon. Yeah, for sure. I think, there's every time you meet somebody and they mention the Olympics and everywhere, oh, is it going to happen? Is it not? I think, you know, all indications say it will, and I think we just have to plan that it will. But at the same time, Tokyo is not the only thing on the schedule next year. Oh, sorry, it's this year. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting back to the World Cups. We start World Cup racing in May, and yeah, we've got a full season through till September. Yeah, I get asked that question a lot too, Beck. I feel like we could probably fund your entire European campaign if we got $1 for every time somebody asked about whether Tokyo will happen or not. But it must be tough to plan a season with those variables up in the air. Beck, thank you so much for joining us today. Happy International Women's Day. We've got some pretty incredible women that we're chatting to today, and it's been great to have you here. Good luck next weekend in Tassie for the Nationals, and good luck to Dan as well. And we'll chat to you soon.